Hello, and welcome to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. Today we are talking with the Vortex Detective Dan Shaw. Dan has been researching the science behind Earth magic since 1991 and has appeared on shows such as Brad Meltzer's Decoded Devil's Triangle, Alaska on the History Channel, Mysteries of the National Parks Yosemite on the Travel Channel, and the documentary Ancient Tomorrow. Dan also consults for TV shows, including NBC's The Blacklist. Thank you so much for being here today, Dan. We're very excited to talk to you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for doing it.
Absolutely. So, the first thing I would like to know is to have you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in researching things like alchemy and the science behind earth magic, and like how would you describe both of those things?
Sure, to start with the thing itself, uh, earth magic is also known as geomancy. Geomancy is a subset of alchemy, and it was a little bit of a long road to 1991 when I first started focusing on earth magic. And if you wind the clock back to 1985, my wife at the time and I conceived a child, and that set off me on my spiritual journey. And so the signs and guides and masters essentially came to me. Things pointed towards Austin, Texas, where I ended up studying with a number of people, one who was channeling an ascended master. So, through a sequence of events, I was actually ready for this. What got us to Austin, Texas was a couple of things. One was astrocartography, which is where your planetary influences are drawn on a map. So my wife and I both had our astrocartography done, our charts done to look at where might be favorable for both of us. And surprisingly, to us, Brownsville, Texas came up. So that and this midwife in Austin, Texas, and we were looking for a natural childbirth, which we succeeded at. We have a son. He's 30 plus years old now, but he's a water baby. So we had a pretty special birth in Austin, Texas. And I was studying with a channel descended master, called himself Father Andre, uh, for a couple years. And when then the vortex maps, what I call vortex maps, when the maps were delivered to me on a silver platter, I was kind of at the other end of that cycle because I was in the throes of breaking up with my wife. But now I had two young children, didn't know how that was going to resolve. I was I was in my darkest hour, and this information, these maps came through to me through a series of events, which pretty involved, and it would take me an hour just to unravel the whole series of events. But when I saw these maps that were maps of PowerPoints, uh, I was triggered. I was activated. Something inside me clicked, and I was like, aha, I see this as an alchemical tool, not only the points, but the maps. And so, uh, through a series of events that actually started at age 7 when I started meditating and seeing a UFO when I was 14, I was actually kind of ready for subsequent events. And so about 40 years ago, I started studying alchemy. About 35 years ago, I started focusing on earth magic as a kind of alchemy. Does that
Yeah,
begin to answer your question? I hope, because
It sure does.
you got me monologuing.
That's
just
okay.
for the clarity of context of maybe anyone's listening who is not as familiar with some of these things, in the context that you're talking about, what does alchemy mean?
Yes. For me, alchemy is about the perfection of ourselves. We ourselves are the great laboratory, the great experiment. So all beings, all sentient beings are moving on their spiritual journey towards their inevitable ascension, the dropping of all limitations and the physical becoming infinite, our physical ascension. So alchemy is that process, and people carry it out in different ways. Some are perhaps in a laboratory, maybe working with metals, the original chemistry, as we know. But here we're striving for perfection of our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual bodies. So I took a turn and I began to study the earth itself as one with us, not separate from us, and an integral part of our spiritual process. So the really taking a scientific look as I could, as scientific as possible look at approach to what is it about place and about Earth and writ large Earth energies. What is it about those things that make us feel something and affect us, affect the way our physiology and the way we think and feel, and support our spiritual development?
So do you feel that there is, going back even as far back as 14 and seeing, you reference a UFO event, do you feel like this is connected to that as well, or are all these things kind of part of the same thing?
There is a certain through line which I'm hoping to explore with you two and your expertise, and to really draw more closely the the overlap between what you've been doing and what I'm doing. So there's my own personal journey uh, is kind of the least interesting part to me in its specifics. What becomes interesting to me is kind of these overarching archetypal principles that everybody else is also experiencing that they're relating to. And because you've kind of heard, I imagine, like so many every different variation of people having some kind of revelatory or paranormal experience. And uh, uh, I I think I've heard as many stories as you have, perhaps, of people's paranormal experiences. But um, my own experience, though, um, I'll say the short answer is yes. There was being prepared to see the UFO by having some preparation and background in doing meditation, having some psychic experiences. In a certain sense, I was prepared to see the UFO. And that, for me, was, I'll say, the spiritual emergency. I don't know if you've read Stanislav Grof. I'd recommend it. There, he has a book called Spiritual Emergency. Speaking to everyone listening, um, uh, he talks about having this moment, the spiritual emergency, and then how people integrate it. So, uh, in in pilgrimage, we like to say, when the journey is complete, when we've returned home, we bring home the boon, we bring home the gift of the journey. And I think the same is in Beth's scenario, the same is also true of these paranormal experiences and this experience of I want to tie this in with what's called ontological shock, where people have shock to their very experience of reality. And and that for me, that's the archetypal experience that I had when these lights appeared to me on, I would say, above my local hillside, not even above the horizon, but above the hills on effectively in front of this hillside. So very close satellites, which I just knew to be some kind of craft, appeared flashed in a complex pattern for a moment, was gone. I can't equate that to vortexes in any way, but that moment for me was the kind of ontological shock where I said, I've got to question everything. What else is just under the cover? Maybe magic is real. I didn't, in my family of origin, and I did listen to your family story there a bit, but in my family of origin, we didn't have any magic growing up. So that was something that was irrational. My family was, highly rationalist. Scientific, that wasn't physical and real. So that was my moment of ontological shock. And I feel that if we were to imagine your listeners out there, some of them have had that experience and others have not. Um, uh, and that's something that's, I think, really worth in our conversation. I'd like to explore that more deeply, um, and the overlap of, because that's where I think or our overlap really is, strikes fire.
Yeah, totally get what you're saying with that. What you're talking about, Robert? Yeah, are you familiar with Robert Anton Wilson? Do you know who that
A
is?
little bit, sure, sure.
He wrote a book called Cosmic Trigger, which he
Cosmic Trigger, yes.
um, talks about initiatory experiences and
Mm, mm,
the Chapel Perilous, which is kind of the same thought process as what you're going
mm,
along with that.
mm-hmm.
I am still not in a place where I want to draw any conclusions, but what seems to me to be true about a lot of people's experiences is that sometimes you just see something that's strange, and sometimes something happens that can possibly become an initiatory experience into something different. And for a lot of us, we have those, a lot of us have one when we're very young, and then something happens later on in life that kind of activates it in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because initiation is not walking through a doorway, it is a series of events that take you deeper and deeper into a thing. Be it, esoteric stuff like we typically talk about on this podcast, or, a job. Like in the story experiences can be, varied and different. The idea of synchronicity is pretty present in Wilson and a bunch of other people who are deep into this, and like just series of meaningful coincidences, basically. It happens a lot with me. I've spent the last 2 days thinking about a movie that is very old that I haven't seen in probably 20 years, but I love, called My Dinner with Andre. And you were talking about a channel entity that you
Yeah.
work with
Yeah.
named Andre. So those things
Gotcha.
are not connected to each other, but they are potentially a meaningful coincidence. That's a
Yeah.
synchronicity to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe 6 weeks ago, I had said to Jonathan, like, I'm really interested in astrocartography and ley lines, and I want to learn more about that. And then you reached out to us,
Oh,
so,
nice. Nice.
right? So it's like,
Uh-huh.
again, synchronicity of like the universe, that my belief, anyways, is, the universe
Uh-huh.
pulling people and opportunities together to just explore these things a lot more deeply.
Well, totally delighted. Anything I can shed light on in terms of vortexes, I have a certain specific approach, different from other people's
Mm.
approach, and I can kind of shed light from a certain direction, which I like to think is pretty geophysical, very
Mhm.
geophysical approach, starting with electromagnetism, proceeding into subtler other energies and in magic and consciousness and intention.
So
So
yeah,
go.
go from the very beginning. Explain to us
Oh,
what
like
is a
you're five.
vortex. Yep, like
It's
I'm five, please.
ELI 5. That's what, explain it like I'm 5. So,
Yes.
sure. So, places make us feel things.
Mhm.
We are physical beings. Our physical body is made up of these highly finely tuned electromagnetic cells. They're a little bit electric, a little bit magnetic, and we exist in this churning ocean of electricity and magnetism, which is the Earth, Sun, Moon combination, and stars and planets as well, other planets as well. And as we move from place to place, and indeed, as this churning ocean moves around us, we are awash in these changing energies, and those affect the way our cells line up, really. We have magnetite in every cell of our brain, and especially in the sinus area, which we might call the third eye. And so there's a plausible mechanism for us to have this magnetic sense, or sometimes called magnetoreception, just like birds and bees and fish and various kinds of animals and plants, in fact, are responsive to magnetic fields. There's an argument to be made that we as humans, and certainly I feel that way, I feel sensitive to these fields, especially as we move from one place to another, for like from the hills to the ocean shore. We're changing elevation. There's a change in the electricity in the air. There's electricity running through the ground. And so we're subject to all these forces, which we perhaps don't often recognize. And sometimes they reach a certain extreme where it could certainly be argued that people experience paranormal things like time slips and creatures coming through and all kinds of various things. So I'm particularly interested in the tie-in between the place and the paranormal. I hear people's paranormal stories on a daily basis. And so the stories themselves for me are a little bit of diminishing value, if you follow me, because they're just they're dime a dozen in a way. But if we can derive some meaning and like bringing home the boon and hoping to, it's if we can tell our story in a way where we gain greater understanding and perhaps the listeners gain greater understanding, then I think we're moving forward towards our spiritual destination and not just retelling a story, if you follow me, or
Mhm.
an experience. I prefer to say experience, actually, over story.
Why do you think there is com like a connection between paranormal experiences and vortexes?
A number of reasons I think overlap. Uh, and one is that our cells in our brain are sensitive and subject to every sort of stimuli, as we know, whether it's pressure, temperature, elevation, electrical ions in the air. We're highly sensitive beings. In fact, our whole bodies are sort of a sort of antenna, and everything is vibration. And so the as maybe we go to a mountaintop or down into a cavern, we're actually affecting our our physiology and our neurology and the way we think and feel. Um, and every place then is going to have its kind of unique, subtle energy signature. And so, for good or ill, uh, some places at some times are going to be beneficial for some people and others not. And that's, I think, one layer or level. And then there's this question about, and tomorrow I'll be speaking to a UFO conference about the potential overlap there between UFOs and vortexes. And I think there's something to be said there in the same way that maybe cryptic creatures, who knows the overlap. Everybody, I think, is entitled to a different opinion about overlap between like cryptic creatures and aliens and UFOs, right? And so if there are these places, which I'll stake my career on the fact that there are these places where the energy is suitable for practicing our psychic abilities and for healing, and places that are perhaps more suitable for entities to be traveling between dimensions and for us to maybe have an experience of slipping through the veil temporarily or perhaps permanently.
Through your research into this area, um, have you or has anyone, because I'm sure you're probably not operating in a bubble here. I'm sure you shared information with people somewhere down the line. Um, to your knowledge, has anyone come up with a way to know if you're in one of those places?
Uh, um, could you ask that question again? A way to know if somebody has passed through the veil?
Or if you're in a place that's likely to be, maybe call it thin like that, like are there like specific signs, or is there a
Oh,
map, like,
brilliant. Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, um, there's almost endless maps of vortexes and ley lines and grid patterns. It's quite remarkable, and have collected many of them in my website, which is vortexmaps.com, and numerous books that I've written and published. The maps are, it's hard to convey on by voice, but the maps are often these exquisite geometric patterns of mountains and bodies of water, equilateral triangles, 5 and 6, 7 and more pointed stars. And if I pan the camera a little bit, you'll have an inside view of a couple of maps that I published. I published a map called the Earth Star Globe, which has been around since the 80s. I reprinted it. It's by Bill Becker and Beth Hagans, and it shows a couple of the so-called platonic solids inscribed in the earth and lined up with the Great Pyramid, and correspondence between that pattern and uh, wind and water patterns and coastlines of continents and all manner of ancient monuments. So I've collected information from just as many places as I possibly could. There are just a kind of innumerable maps, and I'm the in terms of markers for these places, there's kind of two answers, and one is the vortexes are, in my opinion, they're everywhere. In fact, my elevator pitch is this: there's an infinite amount of energy available everywhere all the time for our physical healing, our psychic opening, and for harmonizing the planet. So, infinite amount of energy available everywhere. So you don't have to go to some exotic Bermuda Triangle or Sedona or wherever you think of, Fuji, whatever you think of as a vortex. You can find a location near you where that energy is a little different. Maybe for some reason it's been hasn't been developed. It's been preserved as a park. It's some kind of cultural site. It's got a peak. It's got mineral deposits, a mine. It's cavern, so changes in elevation. There's all kinds of vortex markers. You can look at uh, air photos and maps and see how the landform looks to you. See if you can spot any circles on the landscape or any place where on the ground, you might find places where the trees are growing in unusual ways, or uh, there's some kind of legend, that kind of thing. So you'll find all those kinds of vortex markers someplace near to you, I would say. And you actually threw in a third part to that question. Do you want to redirect me?
no, I'm so digesting the thing you just said, to be really honest with you. That all makes a lot of sense to me. And this is something that's interesting to me on a personal level because of some of the places that I've lived. So I've moved around a lot in my life, and there are places that I've lived where you've got, you know, thousands of people who have had personal experiences that they can't explain, and that, obviously they're not all, you know, lying to themselves and others. And then you've got, places where everyone will look at you like you lost your mind and nothing ever happens, and you can't get any stories by anyone from anything from anyone. and these places can be as close together as 30-minute drive from each other. And it can't be that all the people in one town can't be wrong about the same thing. I mean, it's probably not. But how is it? I've asked the question my whole life. So how is it that
Hmm.
some of these places just seem completely void of anything? And maybe that
Hmm.
fits into the stuff you're talking about.
Hmm. Well, there's like that. Wow, you have a knack for asking kind of multi-layered questions there. So there's uh part of the premise of ley lines is that the place carries an emotion or an emotional memory, so that there's a definite reason why places are where they are and why people are attracted or repelled from a certain place. So that uh, along certain ley lines, we'll find like Empire or the Trail of Tears or whatever it might be. It might be good or bad, but the place itself will hold a certain memory and attract a certain kind of person. And the other element, I think you just have to say, for me, it's different souls have different lessons to learn. But for me, the scales have tipped to I'm living in a shamanic reality, but not full time, and not the other way around. It's like I've I'm continue to be, I don't want to say deluged, but yes, bombarded with like the glitch in the matrix experience where um I've lost I've lost a certain I've lost a certainty when I open a door about what's going to be that's going to be on the other side, what I think is on the other side,
Hmm.
if you follow me. So,
Do you mean like kind of like timeline hopping or dimensional hopping?
well, I've had things appearing and disappearing out of my space in ways that, I mean, it's like ontological shock when something reappears in a spot where for
Hmm.
fact you've got witnesses, this place has
Yeah.
been searched, and then it
Yeah.
appears there. And yep, you know the story. So it's like that, but I think of myself as being like, I'm kind of hard to shock. I've had a lot of things going on. You like try to shock me, but I mean, I'm still wrestling with, if I were really ready to get on the craft, it would show up, so to speak. I'm like, if I have a chance to go through a vortex, I've taken the precaution of telling my family that I'm liable to take to that step through. So
Hmm.
um hopefully I get a peek and make sure it's safe on the other side first.
Yeah.
Know what I'm getting myself into, which I rarely do.
Yeah. Just let me pull back that curtain a little bit and see what's on the other side. Yeah. Tell us what
Right.
you
So yeah.
tell us what you meant about living like a shamanic reality. What does that mean to you?
Uh I'm just so I just know that my perception is so very limited, so very limited. I Several months ago, I was cleaning up a house of someone who had passed on, and I was taking before and after photos of the house, before it was cleaned and after. And in one of my photos, I caught something inexplicable. It's It looked like some kind of black blotch in the frame of the camera. And, I saw it once I clicked the picture, I saw it in the viewfinder, and I looked back up to see if what that black thing was, and it was not apparent to my naked eye. And so I did, what anyone would do. And I took another picture, and that picture, no black thing. Um, so Well, that could be a couple of things, but I did speak to a number of people after that and have had somebody say that after they gave birth, they that kind of opened them up to actually seeing these kind of black pillar-like things in the hospital. So they felt that they knew what I was looking at, and that I did get or not look, what I got a photo of. Um, and and I'm pretty convinced as well that it wasn't just like a glitch of the camera. Um, and I have many, and this is the right place perhaps to tell these many stories of things disappearing and reappearing. You've heard these stories before, and I'm not crazy, you're not crazy. We know this. We're living in this shamanic reality that is not as fixed as we think, or as not as limited as we perceive. There's these other beings apparently coexisting. We're not separate. Uh, and there's all kinds of healing magic to be had that's very place based, and that's what I personally, what I bring, as you heard in my elevator pitch, what I bring to the study of what I call vortexes is, let's bring this loving healing intention to these places. Let's bring ourselves to be fully present. I'm not necessarily doing elaborate rituals as some people do, but I set my mind with kind of intention of a pilgrim, and I very intentionally approach a place and take note of where the thresholds are, and respectful of the place, and make it more than a recreational experience, let's say, and am as present as I can be at the place, breathing the air, taking in the colors and the sounds, maybe drinking a little water, eating a little food, leaving nothing behind, taking a little trash bag with me and a little trash out when I go. And I've had some miraculous experiences for sure. Other people, many, many more miraculous experiences of place than but I have been studying for many years, and I'm uh, written a number of books, and I will send one free to your listeners when they email me. And if I may give my email address, that is energy, ENERGY, energy at vortexmaps.com. So email me. I'll answer every email. I'll send you a link to download an ebook free. And
Awesome.
that might be how vortexes affect us. And that talks about the many, many scores of different ways that our environment just has a direct impact on our physiology. Again, we're not separate.
Mhm.
So when we open up to that sensitivity, my experience is we just get more and more sensitive to how places are affecting us.
Yeah. Thank you for that offer. We'll definitely link that in the show notes.
Sure.
And I mean, a lot of what you say resonates so much with me. I know how I feel. We live very close to Lake Ontario. I know how I feel when we're right by the lake. I
Mm-hmm.
can feel
Mm-hmm.
that energy, and it's very soothing. It's very calming. I feel like I'm releasing things. Or just even like
Mm-hmm.
being in the woods. Like we went for a walk in the woods yesterday, and I can feel my energy settling versus
Mm-hmm.
if we go to Walmart and,
Mm-hmm.
and the music is loud and there's a lot of people there and there's a lot of commotion and stuff like that. Like, I do think you're 100% right. I mean, this is your career, so of course you're right. But like to me, it just resonates so much of like where we are, the environment that we're in really does impact our energy, which impacts our wellness, which impacts, our state of mind and all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm following
Mm-hmm.
you. I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was really a near perfect example of what I think of as the vortex effect. Because if you put those two things side by side, or if you can kind of atomize them or break them down into their little bits, if you went into Walmart and like it was hushed and quiet, like you might feel completely different when you left. But what's,
Very
that
true.
acoustic um, part of what I call the vortex effect. Every physical space, every enclosed space has its fundamental frequency, just as though it were the body of a violin. So you can actually take a physical measurement. You can reduce that using the law of octaves. You can reduce that to an audible note, a note that we would like be able to hear and recognize on a piano, any dimension, whether it's between countries or between walls of your dining room. So every space has, essentially, it's called, in the film business, it's called room tone, that you would be hearing even if there were nothing generating noise. The air in the room would still be vibrating at this fundamental frequency. So
Mhm.
when you're in an enclosed space, you're getting that, for better or worse. It could be some kind of cathedral where it's, designed to have these harmonic proportions, or it could be Walmart, which is essentially dissonant and disharmonious. Or you could be out in the woods where those trees themselves are vortexes. They're antenna. They can actually function as extremely low frequency antenna if you plug in the right wires. Trees do, and they've got their certain electromagnetic effect going on. I don't know what the floor of the forest looks like, what the species of tree you're talking about, but pine needles on the floor is going
Mhm.
to have one kind of energy compared to like deciduous leaves and floor. And then you get down to the body of water, and that's got its thing going on, whether it's in this case, it's a lake. And so there's a change in the electromagnetic field around in the air. And then you've got everything going on with that interface between those two little ecoregions. And that's going to just affect, you're going to be breathing in different electrical ions, and to be like why people have an air ionizer in their home, or a little waterfall. You can kind of get that similar uplift from having those electrically negative ions in the air that are good for you.
Interesting. I never really thought about it. Like, I've seen obviously like the home waterfalls, but like, and I never really put that together of like that is going to change the energy. And that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very much so. Very much so. If you go into
Hmm.
an enclosed space and you go to
Hmm.
shift the energy, you have essentially the options of earth, air, water, and fire. Yes, so sound is a great way to convey that cleansing energy throughout the environment. You can use chimes or drums or
Hmm.
claps, or you can use incense as another way to cleanse that energy all the way to all of the corners of the enclosed space. You can do a little fire ceremony. Uh, if you're indoors, you can actually burn a little 90% rubbing alcohol in a fireproof bowl with some Epsom salts in it.
Hmm.
And you can do a little indoor fire ceremony. You do want to be well ventilated, of course, but you can use fire in that way. I would say people use salt to cleanse, or stones. That would be an example of
Hmm.
using the earth element. And then, of course, water. Um, Great cleansing element. So earth,
Hmm.
air, fire, water. When you go about to cleanse your internal or exterior space, interior, exterior space, you have those options.
I think what I appreciate a lot about the work that you do is that you are taking what people in, you know, the metaphysical world have been practicing forever, but you're helping to explain more scientifically to people who might be a little bit more skeptical about like why these things are beneficial, why these things work. So I think that is very
Mhm.
valuable for a lot of people because I can talk about, using my singing bowls and stuff like that, or
Mhm.
smudging a space or whatever,
Mhm.
but I can't tell you the science behind why it works. So unless you're kind of like already in that world, you know, you might be more skeptical and be like, that makes no sense. But what you're talking about is the reasons why these things work.
I like to say that what I'm bringing forward is the science behind Earth magic, but I
Yeah.
sure don't claim to have complete understanding of
Hmm.
what's going on. There's still this mystery going on, and magic that's, just beyond any kind of explanation. But if there is an explanation to be had in terms of how we are unified with our place, Now, the first we can look at the electromagnetic level that, that where we're being influenced by the place, yes, but also the place is being influenced by us because again, not separate, but
Yeah.
we're at one with the place. So as we as we move about our place, we're bringing to it our hopefully our loving intention and not, leaving behind some kind of haunted energy. And I myself, I come from being a skeptic. So it often happens that if I have some kind of a psychic experience, you'll hear me just cackling, laughing out loud because I can hardly, hardly believe it myself. Still, in a certain sense, I mean, uh, I one of the refrains I hear so often is, "You're going to think I'm crazy." But of course, I'm not going to think you're crazy. In fact, so much I hear that so often that I'm thinking, my next book might be called, I'm Not Crazy. I Know What I Saw.
Yeah.
Because, but I was taking my first very mindful steps down into Walnut Canyon, which is a park in Arizona with cliff dwellings. And I had approached very mindfully. I was I was moving very thoughtfully, and as I took my first steps down into this canyon, I cackled. Uh, couldn't because a certain sense of I can't. I'm still having it fully integrated that I'm feeling the energy of the place. But what I was feeling was I was feeling my knees just shaking as though they were about to give out. um, in my first couple steps down, you understand. Now it's
Hmm.
a long ways down into that canyon, and the Park Service says, going down is optional, coming up is not optional. So what I was feeling, what I realized what I was feeling was that all that shaky knees of all the people before me who had barely made it out of this canyon. And I had a number of other similar experiences around that place, which even to my mind are kind of astonishing. I know that I am sensitive to the energy and memories and feelings that places carry. And I'm still surprised and overjoyed by it really that I have that connection.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, and I feel like what you're explaining is a lot about like hauntings, right? It's like and sometimes I do believe there's conscious hauntings, but a lot of times it's just like a memory that's been imprinted on a place. Do you do you
Mm-hmm.
agree with that?
That's what I was hoping for out of this conversation. Really was, again, we're extracting a kind of meaning where there's the experience, which is it's mysterious, right? We're not sure how to interpret it. It doesn't fit into our ontological worldview, right? So it's
Hmm.
going to fracture that. We're going to have to forget it, as people sometimes do. We hear stories of people like didn't even remember it sometimes afterwards. Listen to a few of your previous shows. So, like that story, like sometimes mom doesn't remember the owl,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes people kind of have to black it out in order to kind of carry on with their life. Other times people can integrate it sometimes. Um, so so sorry. So I got carried off there. But that's what I was hoping you would bring out is this, kind of what's the meaning behind it? Is the haunting, is there actually a consciousness there, or is it more like the memory in the place? There's like, or is this spirit like tied to place or tied to person? I mean, these are, I mean, hopefully useful questions to us to begin to understand what? I mean, where are we trending with this? Is it to just to understand that we are living in this shamanic reality? Like, I mean, I don't know if we can actually tie things down like that or how,
Hmm.
like, where do you derive like the meaning from that or from, the owl experience? How do you, how do you carry on knowing that reality could fracture, that you could open a door and there could be something behind it that, completely out of the blue.
Yeah. And I mean, I know Jonathan has talked about experiences like that where reality shifted in big ways. And, going back to kind of like the memory thing, we moved into my grandmother's house recently. And my entire childhood growing up, every Sunday we had dinner over here and it was always spaghetti and meatballs. And I can't even tell you how many times
Mm,
we have walked into this house having like just come from the store or like, as we're moving in and the house smells like meatballs. Like it smells like sauce and meatballs. And to
mhm,
me, it's like that is like an energetic memory that's replaying in this environment because there's absolutely no logical reason that we should be smelling. And it's not just like me smelling it. Jonathan has smelt it as well, you know.
mhm,
Oh,
mhm.
completely by myself, like without her being around or anything. And on days when we have, we often will do like intermittent fasting and stuff. So like it will have been the day before when anyone had prepared any food. We're not preparing Italian style foods. Like this is not happening. And
Yeah,
then it tastes, it just smells like garlicky meatballs.
dang. It's common, more or less common vortex effect to have smells going on.
Mm, okay.
So that I've heard of other people's experiences where, cigar smell out in the middle of a field where once there was an an inn or some such thing,
Mm,
right? Or the smell of the ocean, 100 miles inland, or uh, even more directly, perhaps to like the place is a kind of metallic taste in the back of the throat where there's minerals in the ground.
interesting.
So again, I think and again, if we can like extract or abstract a lesson or a principle from this, it's that as we as we become open to the possibility that all our senses could be useful in kind of connect or how we're connected to our place, we just become more aware, more and more sensitive. Like you could totally, that could cross your consciousness, or you could kind of filter it out unconsciously
Hmm.
as a hypothetical person, right? But as we have those experiences, those ontological shocks, they those shocks either come gently, yes, or harder and harder. My teacher, Father Andre, used to say the universe knocks softly at first. Yeah,
Mm,
but as we speaking for myself, as I start having these experiences, they kind of start coming faster and faster. And maybe it is like young synchronicities in a certain sense, where we just become aware of the possibility that, hey, that's the third time that's happened. Maybe, I should take note of what's going on, what I was thinking of at the time, or however you want to read that.
mhm. I think you're right, though. I think the more that you do tune in, the more that you can tune in, and we've
Mm.
talked about this
Mhm.
before on the podcast of like, um, psychic abilities are like a muscle. Like I think we all have the ability. Some people are maybe a little bit more attuned naturally,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that you can't work that muscle to get to be able to sense beyond the regular, you know,
Mhm. Yeah,
normal perception.
exactly right. Exactly right. And I think uh people are often familiar with the idea of dowsing
Mm,
for water using dowsing rods. That's kind of in the general awareness, I think. But if that's kind of your complete awareness of dowsing, uh, it would be very rich field for you to dig in deeper because people are in effect using various kinds of things, dowsing rods, or just no things at all, to essentially exercise or practice their sensitivity to these subtle energies in the environment. And of course, uh, being sensitive to those energies is a first step to being able to manipulate or consciously work with those energies.
Interesting.
And there are
Yeah.
lots of ways to do that. If you can read 6 books by 6 different people and get 8 different theories on how you mentioned a few minutes ago we were talking about doing this stuff, and you kind of mentioned that you don't specifically have any real rituals that you do yourself. And it kind of brings up something that I've been thinking about for a really long time and have not had really a good entryway to bring into a conversation with a guest, is that a lot of what people do as a ritual really is to put their brain in a place to be able to experience something. Like the ritual's for you, and that's part of how you're gonna experience the overall phenomenon or not, depending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to reduce it into this scientism or anything, but we know we've got some pretty well established science about those different brainwave
Hmm.
frequencies that people are using to access expanded states. And we have some pretty good hacks to getting to those brainwave frequencies. We can use entrainment from certain audio frequencies, especially slightly different frequencies in each ear. People know that may have heard of binaural beat frequencies, where the interference pattern between those two close tones are creating a third in the range of brainwave. And you can do that with flashing lights as well. And nature is just doing that naturally. The sound of crickets and just the harmonic proportions in the leaves and the fractality of the trees. All these things are bringing our brainwave into these harmonic states, hopefully. And that's where we're having these expanded states. And so that does explain mm, kind of both our fields of specialty on some level. On some level, doesn't seem to fully explain it, right? Because uh, we certain seem to be interacting with all these other intelligences. I mean, if you agree, I mean,
I do.
uh, it's not just. I mean, I'm having a true experience for sure, and I'm also aware that there's these other intelligences out there. So it's hard to I don't know, sometimes carry on with what I think of like the mundane, how many times have I vacuumed this carpet when, that's why aren't I on that craft that I saw when I was 14? What's going on? It's hard to figure out.
I know you said that you were, working with people who connected with the Ascended Master Father Andre. Did you connect
Mhm.
with him as well yourself? Were you like channeling? Do you channel?
Mm. I'm not a conscious channel like this person was years ago, back in 86, 87. I don't quite have that grasp of channeling, but I feel this profound unity with my guides and masters and angels. And um, but I'll often recognize that input because my conscious mind will go, no, that can't be right. Like I'll have this impulse to like, there's a part of my brain that'll be like trying to throw out some information that's coming in. So I'll be able to be like, oh, that's coming from a different place because part of my
Mhm.
brain is like resisting. So in that way, sometimes I can recognize I'm getting a little guidance. And sometimes I'll just say the right thing that'll be completely out of character for me. Sometimes it'll be perfect for the situation.
Mhm.
Um, there's a sense in which I'm channeling what I call stripe paintings, which are acrylic paintings that are bringing through different kinds of energies. So I think we all channel in different ways, but in this working with this ascended master as I did, there was some I've never heard any wisdom as eloquent, and it has carried me through and buoyed me up all these years. So to me, like that's the most real thing, that shamanic reality over there. So I know that I'm under some kind of illusion of separation and limitation, and then that's not the highest truth.
That's awesome that you can catch your um I don't want to say it, like your thinking mind that's trying to filter things out, because I think a lot of people aren't aware enough to recognize, like, they'll just go with the thinking mind that's saying, like, nope, dismiss that. And
Mhm,
oftentimes to their detriment,
mhm,
right? Like,
mhm.
because you're receiving that information for a reason, it's trying to guide you. So I think that's pretty cool that even though if it comes through like just maybe as like a thought, like you're able to kind of differentiate sometimes between what is guidance from a spiritual being. That's what I'm hearing, at least.
Here's hoping, because I ignore that advice at my own detriment for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, yes. And so I do credit my what I call my guides and angels for delivering on a silver platter the what I call the vortex maps, which has to do with these earth energies. And so, I mean, it's been a gift to me. You know how writers are. We just want to pass along the gift, and I'm just really grateful for this platform. You're sharing this time with your listeners, and I'm just here for all questions. And I hope that I can shed some light on the paranormal phenomena you're experiencing. I'm not sure, beyond like just suggesting that place-based nature of some of the phenomena for people, whether it's a health thing or maybe it's malevolent spirits or whatever. If people are aware of the possibility that this is might be place-based, then they can maybe take place-based approaches, such as relocating themselves or objects in the environment, that kind of thing. Maybe they need to do some kind of physical cleansing, which in an extreme case you might think of as an exorcism,
Mhm.
but there's kind of gradations of that in a certain sense. If somebody's died in a space or had a divorce in a space, you can begin, you know, uh, at kind of baby steps, let's say, of taking everything out of the space, coming in a very meditative space and repainting everything possible with a white paint, with a brush that's made out of natural materials. There's certainly uh, plenty of steps an ordinary person might take under ordinary circumstances in terms of cleansing and sanctifying a place. I guess that's what I'm going for.
A way to look at that, and maybe some slightly different terms, is it's a way to assert that you do have some control over your environment, and that can go a long way towards making your experience better in a place. If you can show that the you are the occupant, and so it becomes more of your place and not whatever the phenomenon is place.
Mm-hmm.
You will
Mm-hmm.
have a in my opinion, all I have is
Mm-hmm.
opinions, but I have known people that have suggested things like that too,
Mm-hmm.
because it seems to me, and this is the bias I have of talking to the people that I have known. I have clearly not talked to everyone ever, but the people who have experiences that are negative like that and need those things have negative things in their life, and there are things
Mm-hmm.
going on in their personal lives that are problematic,
Mm-hmm.
that things like rearranging your room, buying a new television,
Mm-hmm.
painting nice bright cheery color can
Mm-hmm.
get you that perspective in the normal part of your life, and it can positively affect the abnormal part of your life as well, the paranormal part.
For for sure. 100% agree. I'm getting all kinds of like shivers of confirmation on that. And again, to maybe just offer like a hint that your listeners can dig in further. If you are wanting to establish that kind of stewardship over your space, it's maybe got some residue of some previous occupants or energy. You uh, if you do just scratch the surface of geomancy, you'll see a couple of ceremonies which are very powerful. And one is first establishing the boundaries. And there again, people, the no separation between our physical reality and our emotional reality. Like if you don't have good boundaries around your physical space, you probably don't have good boundaries around your emotional space and vice versa. So you might establish the boundaries of your space by walking that around the boundaries of the property, and you might um, impart some energy to the place in the ancient way of actually beating a rock, a boundary rock. And if you don't have boundary rocks, placing boundary rocks can be a powerful ceremony. And so, having established your boundaries, then you can establish your center by drawing your longest north-south line and your longest east-west line. You can establish one kind of center, but there's actually many ways of establishing a center. And then you will have begun, and then establish your altar. So many people have not established an altar in their space. So those are all excellent ways of taking those first steps.
Very interesting. You had sent us one of your ebooks,
Hmm.
and when I was looking through it, you said that we can actually create vortexes. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. So so physically, we are a vortex. Straight up, we
Okay.
are a vortex. Whether we're looking at our energetic body, the so-called aura, and thinking of it as like a luminous egg, or maybe it's more of this toroidal donut shape that people have been talking about. But our physical electromagnetic body has this shape. And then simply by moving in a circle, we can create a vortex. And then we can create a vortex by setting up, let's say, stones in a circle. And we can actually create a vortex just by drawing a circle. So we can do this in any number of physical ways, but we can also do it in purely non-physical ways through intention and visualization and magic as well. So, and then on the physiological side, we can get back to like why we're electromagnetic beings, how we have iron in our blood, and how our heart is vortexing all this iron through, and so on all those levels, we are a vortex, and by our very thought and motion, we're creating these vortexes. Whereas though um, we're in a flowing river of energy and we're moving through it, creating all these whorls and vortexes.
So a lot of times, in ritual magic, they talk about casting a circle. And so am I understanding this correctly? Like casting an energetic circle is basically creating a vortex.
I would say so, yes. Yeah. And again,
Interesting.
my opinion, every vortex researcher kind of comes from a different approach, but
Mhm.
certainly that's our word for church is cognate. It's the same word as circle. And so if you go back to old Britain, or before Britain even, uh, the crossroads would have that turnabout. Yes. And in England, of course, they're driving on the left side of the road. They come to that turnabout and they're going around clockwise. And that all has profound spiritual significance. It would be the same as you come into a church and you were following a certain procession around the 12 stages of the cross. You would approach in that clockwise direction for a reason. And if you were going to do a siege on a city, then you would circle in the other direction.
Interesting.
This is why the Muslims are circling around the Kaaba in that direction, is because they're reenacting the siege of the city.
Hmm. So someplace like Stonehenge, and I don't know if you have the answer for this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is Stonehenge a man-made vortex, or was that a natural vortex that ancient people decided to erect the structure around?
Thank you for that question too. That is often very challenging to tease out. Uh, there are certainly in these places all kinds of what I would call vortex markers. And again, starting with the geophysical or the electromagnetic, Stonehenge is kind of a curious location. It's on this plain, Salisbury Plain. In fact, it's part of this, massive UNESCO World Heritage Site that includes, all these other features, those huge man-made mountains and their Silbury Hill, Cursus, which are like these racetrack-like features. So it's a massive thing, but it's Salisbury Plain, which is a chalk plain. And it does turn out, of course, as rainwater percolates through chalk, there are these electrical charges that are exchanged. And so there's the suggestion that the place itself has certain very specific energetic properties, even though it seems to be like undifferentiated plain. Yeah. So that would be what I would call the geophysical or the earth energies that are involved. And then seemingly these beings came through who they were making use of the earth energies. They had an awareness of the earth energies, and they were like, aha, well, we want to enhance this. So we're going to go a great distance to go get these certain stones and transport them here and set them up because these stones have a certain uh, electrical property, actually. They're piezoelectric because they've got some quartz in them. Some of the stones are blue stones from a place called Preseli. That place is part of a an elaborate, no, it's not quite the right word either. Um, it's a Preseli and Stonehenge make 2 points of a right triangle. There's a third point. I'm going to mispronounce it, but I believe it's Bryn Shelley Dew. And if you map those 3 points, you get a certain right triangle. So there's all manner of vortex markers coming together there, right? There's the natural place, the man-made part ceremony, and then the stones. And in my book, Stonehenge Gardening Tips, I actually give several dozen different parts of Stonehenge and how they contribute to the vortex effect there. Um, it does get complex because there's the natural vortex effect and then you could say the man-made or intentional part of the vortex effect. Yeah.
Interesting. Yep. So it is both. Just there's a lot to unpack here, but I think it's just important. I think it's not something that a lot of people take the time to think about, or
Mhm.
ask questions about. It's just kind
Mhm.
of, certain people are drawn to certain places, like you said. There's people who are just very drawn to the ocean, and
Mhm.
I don't know that a lot of people look beyond the reason why, like what is that actually doing for me? And I
Mhm.
I can speak for myself of like when I go to the ocean again, that's one of those places where it's just like I can feel like an energetic release. I can just feel like my vibration shifting just by being near it,
Mhm.
and there is a reason for that. you know
Well, there is, and I started out too as a skeptic because I was experiencing things which there was no place for in my worldview, and I had the call, and then the refusal of the call. Took me years to kind of finally come around to owning it as fully. Well, took me until now to own it as fully as I do now. But um, there's uh, there's bound to be some denial for people at first when they first have these kinds of ontological shocks. I mean, it takes a while for people to integrate. What I'm suggesting here, like I think of your listeners as being sophisticated. They've heard a few episodes. They've had some experiences. Yeah. Um, but here, what I hope to impart is to pass along this gift that the earth itself is a profound alchemical tool there to gift you just a miraculous healing. And if you can consider the possibility that there's, let's say, this electromagnetic thing going on which we don't directly perceive. We can't visually see it. We might begin to perceive it in any number of ways. The hair stands up on our back of our neck or whatever. Different people are sensitive to these energies in different ways. But if we can begin to experience ourselves as these electromagnetic beings living in an electromagnetic world, then when we might, like, say, take off our shoes when we get to these energetically charged places, and maybe think about, oh, I should be wearing clothes of natural fibers because those are electrically different from polyester. And that's why I don't like polyester. Have a preference for certain foods. We are these electromagnetic to oversimplify, we are electromagnetic beings, and we're existing in this churning ocean, and we ignore that to our detriment. And we do know more than we understand. So hopefully, I could bring a little science behind the earth magic and a little greater understanding.
Definitely appreciate that a lot. Dan, I would love to have you back on because I think there's a lot more that we can explore together. So I think
Great.
that I hope you would be open to that. But
Sure.
tell our listeners, we're going to link your website and your email address, but are you on social media? Are there other places that people can find you? And tell us a little bit about your books.
Sure. I am very accessible. I'm not any kind of celebrity who doesn't answer his phone. I answer my phone. I answer all emails. I will not think that you are crazy, for sure. And so if you'll come to my website, vortexmaps.com, you can send me that email, and I'll send you a link to download that ebook. I've written a number of books, How Vortexes Affect Us, Stonehenge Gardening Tips, Using Earth Energies in Your Garden, a number of vortex field guides, one to Shasta, one to France, for example. And I'm putting it all together now in a comprehensive introduction to earth magic. I am gathering up some very committed students of geomancy who are along for kind of the extended ride of the comprehensive introduction to earth magic. So if that's something your listeners would be interested in, I invite them to come along on that ride. And I'm in Southern Oregon. If you're passing through the Mount Shasta area, I'm an hour north of Mount Shasta in Southern Oregon. Accessible to the interstate. Stop for a cup of tea. I'm happy to give people vortex tours. I travel, I talk, I do work on people's place, a little energetic mapping and perhaps adjustment. And I will talk to a group of any size. So again, I'm really grateful for this opportunity with you. And of course, I want to come back. Sure.
Wonderful. And we're very grateful that you took the time to talk to us today. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I think gave me a lot of things to think about and want to explore more. So I appreciate that a lot.
Good. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for talking with us.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.